Distributions are dead. At DrupalCon Atlanta last year in March, Dries announced the idea of site templates and the site template marketplace. He identified this as an opportunity to build and launch Drupal sites faster and cheaper. He said that if this was successful, it could potentially replace distributions. Later last year in Vienna, the first site template launched, but there wasn't a marketplace yet. And then finally, 2 months ago in Chicago, the marketplace went live with 11 site templates. Long live distributions. G'day, kia ora. My name's Michael. This is Recipes, Site Templates, and the Future of Drupal Distributions. I've got the advantage of having one of the later slots, so I got to hear what Murray had to say yesterday from the perspective of the site template marketplace, and of course what Pam had to say this morning from the perspective of Drupal CMS, and I get to provide the rebuttal. Not really, but I'm going to talk more from Drupal core is very dear to my heart, so it's going to be more less focused on Drupal CMS and the marketplace as such. I will talk about them, but it's going to be more hands-on on how you can build recipes and site templates. So we'll start with some audience participation. Everyone loves that. So hands up if you've applied a recipe. So hang on, that's too far. Hands up if you've built or maintained an install profile before. All right, keep your hands up if you've cursed about that install profile before. Don't put your hand down. All right, you can put your hands down. Who's applied a recipe before? And anyone created a recipe? A few less people. And who has installed a site template? Good one. And who's built a site template? Pam, I know you have. Murray. A couple others. Okay, but not so many others, so this should be helpful, hopefully. So first we'll talk about distributions. So what is a distro? What am I talking about? I think the definition depends who you ask, but it's kind of loosely defined, but there's a definition from Drupal.org, or maybe it's not up to date, I don't know. But in general, it's a package that includes all of Drupal core, some modules, contrib, maybe custom, an install profile, a theme, and some opinionated config. Once you choose your distro, you're kind of stuck with it for the life of your project. It's very hard to get away from it. That means you're inheriting the software, the bugs, the governance, the community, all of that goes along with the distro. Once you install it, you're locked to the install profile, and as I said, it's hard to change. You kind of stuck with some of the config that the profile provides. And as your requirements for the site diverge from the profile, your upgrades to the profile or the distro become config reconciliation projects. So let's look at an example. Imagine you use maybe Commerce Kickstart or Thunder, or maybe this isn't a dig on any of them, this is just the general. Maybe you have your own proprietary profile. Maybe you're a university that has dozens or hundreds of different sites and you want them all operating the same. And so maybe you have a product content type, or you have an article content type, or you have a course content type. But your particular site, or one of your sites, needs some other requirements. It needs a new field. You need the warehouse location for your product, or you need the read time for your article, or you need information about scholarships for your course. And you start adding some new fields, changing some views, changing your forms and your views displays, and then you want to do the upgrade to your distribution. You come along and then you've got a conflict because your distro is providing one set of config, you've got your own, maybe there's some integration code that doesn't work. And so you've got to choose, it's like a Git conflict. You've got to, do I accept theirs, do I accept mine, or do I try and merge them together? And it's not just config, it's modules too. So maybe you decided, I want to use the fantastic scheduled transitions module to choose when my content gets published. But then the distro adds that same feature in version 2, but they're using the scheduler module. Then you're kind of stuck with both. Do you get rid of what you had? Do you try and disable what was provided by the profile? So what's the alternative? So what if the features were composable and they weren't locked to the profile? What if they could be applied to existing sites, not just those built from the distro? What if the features could be stacked on top of other features? And what if the config was just applied once and then it was yours, you can do what you want with? So this is where recipes come in. So recipes boil down to a set of instructions that essentially install some modules, apply some config, and then go away. They have no further role. There's no knowledge of what else is on the site. They provide no functionality on their own. There's no hooks, there's no plugins, there's no services. It's just stuff is applied and then it's gone. So I'm going to look at some examples that are in Drupal core. So you've all seen the Drupal standard install profile. That has been split out into a number of different recipes that essentially if you apply all of those recipes, you get the standard install, but without the install profile. So here's 3 that I've picked out that kind of work together. The tags taxonomy recipe, all it does is install the taxonomy module and creates the tags vocabulary. Then we have the article content type recipe that makes sure the node module is installed and creates an article content type. It has some fields like the body, but it doesn't have the tags field. Finally, there's the article tags recipe that is going to apply those other 2 recipes first, and then it's going to add a tags field to your article content type. So this shows just how simple a recipe can be, but also how they can build upon other recipes. So what that looks like, if we look at the tags taxonomy recipe, you've got a config directory, a test directory, and a recipe.yaml file. Inside the config directory, it's basically a config export that you would be used to from doing like a drush config export, but it's just only a config that's going to be imported with this recipe. And I'll try and switch over to my IDE so we can have a look at that. So basically this is what a recipe YAML file looks like. Just going to open it like this. So basically we start with some metadata about the recipe, so a name, description, and a type. That's all pretty boring. But then we've got the install key that is a list of modules that we want to install with the recipe. If they're already installed, we don't do anything. If they're not installed, we obviously install them. And then finally, we specify what we want to do about config. So first thing we've got here is strict. In this case, we're saying false. We don't want to. What that means is if we already have a tags vocabulary on the site with the same machine name, we don't care about the one that we're providing in the recipe, just use the existing one. It doesn't matter how it's defined, just that it exists. And then finally, the import key, we can list what config from the modules we're installing that we want to import. So in this case, we want to import all of taxonomy's config, but we don't want to do anything with views because, well, there's a to-do in the YAML file. Hopefully, we don't actually need to install views in the future. So if we then move on to the article content type, it's similar, but you can see there's a fair bit more config there because we're creating the content type, we're creating some field storages, and we're attaching the fields to the content type as well. And the YAML file for that, again, similar sort of structure. We've got the metadata at the top. Then we install a bunch of modules, image, node, and path here. Now, for this config strict key, we only want to be strict about the field storage for the image field. Everything else is essentially false. And then we list, again, what we want to import for the node module. Before you saw we did a wildcard. This is actually specifying individual configs to import. Same for image module. And then this is a new concept. We've got config actions. So that basically allows you to modify config that might or might not already exist on the site. So in this case, the article form display config we start with a create if not exist. So if it already exists, great, we'll use that. If it doesn't exist, we'll create it. And these are the parameters for it. And then the next thing we do is set our components. So basically, the body field is going to use the text area with summary, widget, etc. And finally, our article tags recipe. As you can see, there's the field tag storage and attaching it to the article content type and the recipe YAML again. And this one's quite simple. Metadata. New key here is recipes. So we're listing the recipes we looked at just before. So basically, when you apply this recipe, the first thing it does is apply these other two recipes. Install views if it's not already installed, and then do stuff with config. So I'm going to be brave and try and do a live demo here. So brave or stupid, there's a fine line, I'm told. So this is a Drupal site. As you'll see, there's no content types yet. So if I go add content, there you go. We don't have any content types to create. So if I come to my terminal, I've already filled this out. This is smart. This is how you apply a recipe via the command line. So I'm using DDev. I'm going to run drush recipe and then just the path to the recipe. And I'm passing -v so you can see the verbose output so you know what's going on. So that shows us here recipes applied. We've got the article content type recipe, and it says here it's been applied successfully. I'll be the judge of that. What do you reckon? If we refresh this, there you go. We can create an article now. Yay. You will notice, however, there's no tags field because obviously it wasn't in that article recipe. So now we're going to, I'll just clear that so I can see it. We're going to apply the article tags recipe. So I'm skipping the tags taxonomy recipe that creates the vocab and installs the taxonomy module. And this one's going to do, well, it's going to apply 3 recipes you should see in the output here. There we go, recipes applied, or first modules installed taxonomy, recipes applied, article content type tags, and article tags. So, moment of truth, did it work? There you go, we've got our tags field on our content type. Now, what else we can do is we can go and change that field. So I'm going to call it tags1. And then I'm going to rerun this recipe. And it's basically going to demonstrate that because we're doing the create if not exists and we're not using strict config, like it's not going to override my field. Like my changes are going to stick. So that kind of demonstrates how you can apply a recipe to an existing site. Like you might already have an article content type. You apply the one that adds the tags field to it, and it's not going to mess everything else up. All right, well, that went better than expected. So, look, I'm going to be honest. So, let's move on to site templates. So, as you would know if you went to Murray's talk or Pam's talk, site templates provide a starting point for building a site. This might be for an enterprise that has lots of microsites or campaign sites. Maybe they have multiple templates. Developer might come into work on Monday, get told, hey, we need this new site to go live on Friday. And the idea is, that could be possible. Another use case might be agencies using it as a starting point for their client sites. I'm sure many of us have our own standard set of features that we apply on all of our sites, whether it's, a set of modules or content types or integrations, whatever. And a lot of us have like a distro or some sort of repo that we pull this stuff from, and a site template might be a new way forward. Just to make it more efficient to start a new site. Or, of course, there's also the marketplace. Yeah, Murray showed this a lot. We've got commercial templates, community templates, can be used for small businesses, and yeah, different sorts of streams, like whether it's healthcare or government or e-commerce or whatever. So yeah, that's another use case for it. So site templates are like distros. They contain, or they provide modules. They provide some opinionated config. They should provide a theme and maybe some demo content. But the main difference is there's no real upgrade path. You install it once, and then it's yours. You do what you want with it. So the anatomy of a site template is basically you start with a YAML file, you define some recipes to apply, some modules to install, some config to import or take action on, and also some default content. So if that sounds familiar, that's because it should. A site template is a recipe. There's no technical difference. You still have a recipe.yaml file and it looks exactly the same. You can consider it to be a mega recipe, I guess like a composer meta package, if anyone's used one of those. So how do we make a site template? There's two, might be more than two, but there's two ways that I know of to make a site template. The first is the manual way, which if you want to fine-tune everything that goes into it, you really want to curate it, you can start by creating a bunch of small recipes, and these might be reusable. So for an agency, you might have a lot of existing sites, and you want to create, I don't know, a workflow recipe. You can take that to put in your new site template, but you could also reuse it on an existing site. So yeah, basically, this is kind of the way that you can architect your recipe and like have full control of what's going on. So basically, build your recipes, put them all in one YAML file, add some other modules that you need for the site that don't fit into recipes, some config to glue everything together if you need to, and set, some of your settings, and then provide a theme, whether it's creating a new theme from scratch or extending an existing one or using one from Contrib or whatever. Put that in your recipe.yaml and then install it. So along the way, when you're building a site template, you can install it as many times as you want and make sure that nothing's broken so far. I wouldn't try to build everything at once and then hit go. So build it incrementally. And once you're happy with what you've got on your brand new site, you can start entering content just the way you normally would. You can create nodes, you can create canvas pages, you can create blocks, and then you can use this drush content export command basically to save your content as YAML files, and those go into your recipe. The other way that you can create a site template is the automatic way, which is much, much easier. So if you don't need the abstraction of all the different recipes, you just want to build your site and get it out there so other people can use it. You start by building a site however you want, whatever you're used to, whatever you like. Then install the Drupal CMS helper module. Despite the name, you don't need Drupal CMS to use it. Most of what it does is to provide the drush site export command. And that's much better than this content export one I showed you earlier, because this just does everything in one hit. You pass it the directory to where you want to save your site template, and Bob's your uncle. Here's one I prepared earlier. So, can you see that? No, let me see. This is Kaimami, so you would know umami. This is the New Zealand version of it. So essentially what I've done here is I've installed the umami profile, I've made a few tweaks to it, and then I've installed Drupal CMS helper module, exported it, and again, had to make a couple extra tweaks, but we won't talk about those. And there's your site template. So before we go through it, I'm going to install it because it takes a little while to run. You would know if you've installed Umami before. There's a bunch of translation stuff that goes on, but essentially drush, site install, path to your recipe, and then it goes away and does some stuff. So coming back here, once again, we've got our metadata, we've got our modules to install, and it's a long list. So in the manual way of creating a recipe, these would probably be broken up into different recipes that are installing like chunks of modules that relate to each other. But this is just like, here's everything we need for this site. And then same for config, we just have a heck of a lot of actions. And then in the directory itself, we've got this config directory, bigger, content directory, sorry, you've got your block content, which all have these nice UUIDs, you got your nodes, and yeah, this is basically what the export of all of the content looks like. If we come back here, you can see a bunch of warnings, which is normal if you've ever installed Umami. But success at the end, we've got our Drupal site. And I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to tdev launch. Where's that window gone? There you go. There's Umami or Kaimami installed from a site template. Lost my presenter view. Okay, so briefly talking about the marketplace. So if you want to submit a site template to the marketplace, it must meet the quality guidelines that are set out. So it needs to be built on Drupal CMS. You can't use Umami. It should have Drupal Canvas, probably. I'm not sure if that's a requirement, but I think it is. It's highly recommended if it's not. It needs to go through a review process, make sure it meets all of the accessibility guidelines and all sorts of stuff like that. I believe it's currently only open to Drupal certified partners and Ripple makers. I'm not sure when that might change, but that's the current status. But you can also create a community template. So recipes and site templates can be shared on Drupal.org as general projects, just like a Drupal module or a Drupal theme. So if you don't want or you don't quite meet the guidelines, you can still share it with the community as you would any other module. I've got a link to a blog post, I think, from Pam about the rules here, but I didn't put it on the slide for some reason, so you'll have to look it up. It's called Differentiating Marketplace Site Templates and Community Site Templates. So what are the limitations and trade-offs of site templates versus the traditional distribution? The biggest one for me that I don't really know the answer to is that there's not really an upgrade path as such. It's really meant as a starting point for you to have to start with, and then you make your own decisions going forward. I guess if there's modules and themes and things like that that are included in the site template, you can always compose or upgrade those to get to the latest versions. But I'm yet to see kind of what that looks like. And I guess this means that from an agency's perspective, it means if you have one site that's built on version 1 of a site template and another site that's built on version 2 of the site template, I guess for your documentation and your support, you might have, I guess, a difference in a disparity of features or just the way things look. So essentially, I guess you're trading control over everything for the flexibility to I guess, extends the templates a lot more. So are distributions dead? I don't think so. I think the definition of a distribution is evolving. I think like in the traditional sense, install profiles still have a place. So one particular example that I know of is, let's say there's a university that has a dozen or so sites. They have their install profile, their standard distribution, and they want all of their sites to be the same. They have some sites that extends that distribution, and I don't think they're switching to site templates at the moment. But I think for agencies, as I mentioned before, it's a good way to kick off your sites to save a bit of time in the initial setup. And obviously for the marketplace, for small businesses to be able to pick and choose a site, that's a great win. Same for hobbyists, and as Pam mentioned this morning, like making it really available for that cheaper segment of the funnel that she showed. That's where the marketplace templates should really shine, I think. I think Murray also mentioned that for Morphed, sorry to call you out directly, but you said maybe you probably see it more as like a business card for your brand. Not quite sure how like the commercial side of it's going to go yet, but that's yet to be seen. So we'll have to see there. I think that's all I've got. So I'm open to questions or discussions, or tell me why I'm wrong. So cheers. Murray? Yeah. Yeah, so the question is how, what are the challenges, or what is the approach taken to manually creating a site template by splitting up all the recipes and everything? One thing I will say is that in the past, if you've ever tried to make a distribution with, God forbid, features back in the day, or something more modern recently, and you start out and you go, oh, I'm going to have my article content type module, and I'm going to have my text format module and my media module, and then they all have these intertwined dependencies, and you're like, oh shit, does this live in this one, or does this live in this one, or whatever. The great thing about recipes is with those less strict config actions, they can kind of live in both and live in harmony together. So, if one defines the full HTML text format and one also needs to use it, like they don't necessarily need to have a dependency on it. But to answer the question more directly, from my experience, I started out by looking at what's in Drupal CMS, specifically in the byte template, and looking at like every single recipe and saying, okay, how does this fit together? And what of this do I want to use? And what can I put into my own recipe? And I really used that as a guide, I guess. So same with the core recipes as well, like just the way that they're structured to not do too much. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay. Who did?
There's a new project. It's DrupYard_recipe_builder, and it provides a drush command that will sort of take you through the process of generating a recipe from the stuff that you want to include. So it's a really helpful way of reducing error-prone, oh, I made a mistake in the YAML, or I can't remember what the key for this. It's kind of new, but I would highly recommend if you're just starting out and you're looking to create tidy recipes rather than using the site export, that's a really handy tool to try.
Okay, DrupYard recipe builder, everyone.
Anyone got any other questions?
Sometimes with these things, like there's things you have to do for public distribution, and then there's a certain point where efficiency kind of kicks in internally. Are you seeing like using discrete recipes for features, you know, the classic features use case internally?
The honest answer is I spent a lot of time researching and setting this stuff up, and then some urgent client work came up, and then we haven't really got to a point where we're using this in production or on actual sites. So we've done some demo stuff, but yeah, can't answer that.